Welcome, everybody, to our event this evening. My name is Elizabeth. I'm the general manager at Nowhere Bookshop, and I'm really glad to somewhat see all of you here this evening. Thank you so much for purchasing your ticket and attending tonight's event. I think it's going to be a great one. Just a note that the signed copies of Adam's book will ship early next week. He's coming in to sign with us this weekend. And for those of you who are local, the bookstore is actually going to open sometime soon for real. We keep teasing, but we're aiming for a mid-July open. So we're really excited to see all of you in the physical space at 5154 Broadway. Please come down and see us. It should be a lot of fun. During the event, please ask your questions of the authors in the Q&A button down below. Don't put those in chat so that we can make sure that we answer all of the questions in the course of the event. Alrighty, so let me introduce our panelists. First of all, a huge thank you to Shea Serrano for moderating tonight's event. Shea Serrano is a #1 New York Times bestselling author known for books like The Rap Yearbook, Basketball and Other Things, Movies and Other Things, and his newest title, Hip Hop and Other Things, which goes on sale in October and is available for pre-order from Nowhere Bookshop now. I'll drop that link in the chat. And he is here to talk with Adam Serwer about his new book. Adam Serwer has written for The Atlantic since 2016, focusing on contemporary politics while often viewing it through the lens of history. Serwer was a spring fellowship at the Shorenstein Center at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, as well as the Ira Lippman Fellow at the Columbia University School of Journalism. He's the recipient of the 2019 Hillman Prize for Opinion Journalism and lives here in San Antonio with his family. And tonight we're celebrating the release of his new book, The Cruelty is the Point, The Past, Present, and Future of Trump's America, which on sale today and which you all now proudly own. So without further ado, here are our two panelists.
What up, baby?
Hey, what's going on?
It's like I'm fucking looking at myself. That's what's going on.
How's San Antonio?
San Antonio? Are you not? Oh, you're not in San Antonio right now, right?
Yeah, I mean, so, this is you've been to my house. This is not, this chaotic energy is my father's office. My father is a college professor, and this, as you can see, is very college professor energy right here.
I thought it was a Zoom background, a fake. I didn't know. People
I had a fake, like, yeah,
real houses like that with books like that and shelves like that.
There you go.
This makes so much sense. If you read an Adam Serwer piece, your background makes sense. To a Shea Serrano piece, and my background makes sense.
No, there are no like incredibly awesome posters in the background. I don't see your arcade games. I don't see.
That's at my office. Oh, here.
Your office is incredible.
Here's a Fast and the Furious car. I'm out. Here's a Ric Flair action figure. That's what I have on my desk. And and a back scratcher. This is like. Do you have one of these?
I do not have one of those. I just have cats who just, scratch me.
You trained your cats to scratch your back? That's wild.
No, it's more like a violent thing.
Oh,
than a
that's why I don't have cats.
Relaxation. It's tough, but it's worth it.
When I went to your house the first time, I remember it felt the way the cats were like walking around, like I was in a lion's den. Like they were looking at me like that. That's
they liked you.
Did they? I know one of them.
Eggsy came up to you.
Eggsy was my guy.
He actually came up to you and was like, and for those of you who are familiar with Eggsy from my Twitter feed, he's the orange and white cat. He really likes getting smacked on his ass. So he came up to Shea immediately and stuck his ass in Shea's face. And I was like, you just gotta hit it, because that's what he likes.
Familiar. I'm familiar with that move. From a lot of walks of my life. Adam, you have a new book.
Yeah, I know. It's really crazy.
It's fucking awesome.
I don't know why I did that, but I did it.
You did it. How long were you working on this thing?
I mean, so some of it is obviously like previously published stuff. So it is both a compilation of my work over the past 5 years,
Mhm.
And there's a bunch of new essays, new intros to previously published stuff, and 3 new big ones. One on immigration, specifically focused on, when I was going to Trump rallies a lot, I would hear this refrain from people who are at Trump rallies who would say to me, my ancestors were immigrants too, but they came here the right way.
Yeah.
And incidentally, if you look at like the Trump administration, some of the most prominent nativists in the Trump administration, they have names like Miller and Kelly and Giuliani, basically people who at the turn of the century were demonized as foreigners who were unassimilable to American life. And all of a sudden now they're saying the same thing about immigrants who are coming from the south of the border. They're saying they're poor, they're illiterate, they have no skills, and so they couldn't make it in American society. But of course, that's the story of pretty much all the European immigrants in the United States after the Civil War. And the difference, though, is that there was no militarized system at the border to keep them from coming in, and there was no deportation machine to kick them out once they came in. So when people say they came the right way, really, there was almost no wrong way to do it if you were a European immigrant. Even if you were a European immigrant who faced discrimination because you were Jewish or Italian, we basically had open borders for Europeans for most of the United States existence. You didn't have to know how to speak English. You could get in if you could read and write in your own language. You had to have like maybe $8 to your name when you walked in. And so this idea, we basically built this incredible, militarized immigration system, not to keep out those immigrants, although we did try to keep them out eventually. We built it to keep out immigrants south of the border because for diplomatic reasons, the Western Hemisphere was not originally part of those restrictions that were passed in the early part of the 20th century. I have another piece about, one of the other new pieces is about the politics of police unions, which, folks in San Antonio may be familiar with because we just went through a referendum over collective bargaining in the city, over whether the police would continue to have collective bargaining rights, which was more symbolic than substantive, but some of you have probably heard about it. And a third essay about internal Jewish politics as a result of Donald Trump's strong support for Israel and the Israeli government's strong support for Donald Trump, and that sort of mutual relationship, which is at odds with the politics of the vast majority of American Jews in the United States, who currently are pretty liberal. But the book itself is focused, largely, the title is obviously The Cruelty is the Point, but the book itself is focused on cruelty as it is used in politics. So obviously anybody can be cruel, any like individual person. But the point of the book is that in American politics, cruelty becomes a major part of our politics when we try to exclude particular groups of people from political rights under the Constitution and keep them out of the political process. And this is something that we've seen throughout our history, from the founding, war and Reconstruction to present. And it's something that we've been dealing with for a long time. It's not just something that was invented by Donald Trump. And I felt like it was really important to write a book that emphasized that point, because it's sort of, even when Donald Trump was elected, people would say things like, this isn't America, this isn't who we are. And it's like, well, no, by definition, this is who we are. But also, what he represented is, a combination of ideologies that have been part of the American political conversation for a very long time. And we just sort of pretended that they were long in our past, they were long conquered.
I think what just happened here, there are 60-ish people who are watching right now. This is an exact perfect encapsulation of what our friendship is. Ever since you moved to San Antonio, we started hanging out, because I was like, hey, here's a Fast and the Furious car. And you're like, here's 4 minutes on immigration restrictionism.
Oh, no.
And the impact.
That's terrible. That's awful on my part. Although unfortunately, I have only seen the first Fast and the Furious, which is a serious hacker defect.
The best one.
But what it is like it's like somebody remade Point Break, but made it about cars and also turned it into an incredible franchise. Is that a misreading?
That's it. That's exactly correct. You're right on. You nailed it. You're now you're covered.
I feel like I'm watching that movie to get it.
Yeah,
I'm,
if you've seen the trailers, you're good. You're all caught up.
but the first one, I feel like the first one is like very serious in tone. You know what I'm saying? Like it is like a pretty. It's not. It like they kind of mess everything up in the end, and it's not like and people seem really vulnerable. Whereas like as the series goes on, it seems like not only do the stunts and the situations get crazier, but they all sort of like become superheroes in a way. Is that a misreading?
No, that's absolutely true. In the very first one, Dominic Toretto gets into an accident and he's like, oh, like he's hurt bad, right? And then by the fourth one, he literally gets shot in the back with a gun, boom, and then he just looks like that happened. He's not wearing a bulletproof vest or anything. He just takes it right in the shoulder blade, and it doesn't bother him at all. Let me ask you before this spirals too far out of control. You mentioned this briefly here. But the title of the book is "A Cruelty is the Point," and this is, of course, lifted from like this is how I know you was this when you wrote this article, and then everybody was talking about this article, the "Cruelty is the Point" article. Can you talk about how you like how we get from there to like a full-on book?
Yeah, I mean, I just think you know the major challenge to me that Trump has posed is to the fragile experiment with multiracial democracy that America has been engaged in since 1965. And like when you think about the United States, you know, all of America's citizens have not had the right to vote, regardless of race, until the Voting Rights Act passed in 1965. So we're actually kind of new at this multiracial democracy thing, and we're still figuring it out. And Trump came in, and his, you know, in 2012 when Mitt Romney was running, and he talked about self-deportation, and he made birther jokes when he was in Michigan, and he sought Donald Trump's endorsement, and then he lost to Barack Obama really badly despite a struggling economy, and people sort of thought, well, and the Republican Party had this like famous autopsy, and they're like, well, maybe we need to get a little less racist. And so the people who ended up advising Donald Trump's campaign were like, no, actually, we think we need to be even more racist, and that's a lot of people who stayed home in 2012 because Mitt Romney wasn't racist enough. And the only reason that really worked is because Donald Trump's coalition has sort of like an ideal geographic distribution in the Electoral College. It also means that if they have a lot more influence in the Senate. And these political systems, these political structures that enhance the most conservative part of the American electorate, that incentivizes the Republican political culture that you're seeing, which is just like constantly trying to scare the crap out of these people and tell them that, these people are going to come here and end your way of life, critical race theory, the migrant caravan. A couple of years ago when Obama was still president, we had this hysterical nonsense about how like Muslims were going to impose Taliban style Sharia law in the United States despite being like 1% of the population. And this is all a strategy. And what Trump really did, a strategy to hold power by riling up this minoritarian but still extremely politically significant element of the population. And what Donald Trump really did was show them how much they could get away with. And that's why you're seeing, even though he lost, it's not stopping, because Republicans have recognized that this style of politics is not going to cost us as much as we think it is, especially if we pass restrictive voting laws in the states, and we try to prevent Democratic leaning constituencies from influencing the political process. And ultimately, the only thing that's going to change that sort of politics of cruelty is if the Democrats make necessary structural changes to force the Republican Party to reach outside of its base. Now, why do I say that? I say that because 100 years ago, the Democratic Party was the party of white supremacy, and what changed them was that it beginning in 1932 with the New Deal, when they won the Northern Black vote, that coalition, that interracial coalition of unions and urban liberals and Black voters, forced the Democratic Party to change from what was at the time an extremely racist organization into a party that supported civil rights. So we know that the only way that politicians step away from that kind of politics is if they serve a constituency that's diverse enough that that kind of politics is not viable. Like, you'll never see Democrats deliberately talking a ton of shit about non-college educated white men. They might accidentally say something stupid and then it becomes a gaffe for 2 weeks, but they're not deliberately going to attack that group of people, because they rely, even though non-college white men are, they trend Republican, they're still a massive part of the Democratic vote, and so they can't afford to alienate them. And as long as the Republican Party can win power, being as homogeneous as it is, without having to reach out to Americans of different backgrounds, they're going to have the kind of politics that they have.
Do you miss Donald Trump?
I do not miss him at all. I am so relieved that he lost. I was like, I really, it was very, I think, it was very difficult to think about, like, what the heck. I mean, like, part of the thing about Donald Trump is he himself is not very interesting. He's a very simple person. His like appetites and lusts are really obvious. He's a very superficial human being, in many ways. What's interesting is him as a phenomenon. As a person, he's not particularly interesting. And so there was really not that much to say about Donald Trump in the end. It had all been already said. And so one of the things that I worried about was, like, if he won, like, what do you say about this guy about whom, he's actually not that complicated. The forces that have brought him to the fore are now really obvious. In 2016, 2015, people were engaging in a kind of denial, trying to say that what was happening was not what was happening. And it's sort of fitting that, I mean, that his presidency ended with the Capitol riot, which was just like both extremely stupid and extremely dangerous. It was a kind of farce. But it was still like an attempt to overthrow an election. I mean, it sort of set the tone for his entire presidency, where everything was both dangerous and exceptionally stupid at the same time. And I'm actually quite relieved that I don't have to write about that every day. The Biden administration has a lot of problems. They're not doing everything right, but I don't feel like I'm drowning in like the president saying incredibly stupid things every 5 minutes in the news cycle, worrying. Like, I think one of my former colleagues, Matt Ford, he said that under the Trump administration, it was less of a news cycle and more like those episodes at the beginning of Battlestar Galactica where the Cylons attack every 11 minutes. I'm really glad that I don't have to deal with a Cylon attack every 11 minutes anymore.
I'm mostly glad that ever since November, I have gotten way less tweets telling me to go back to Mexico. Like, that doesn't happen near as much. I don't know where they went. I don't know what happened to those people, but I get the tweets less now, which is good for me.
They were having, I mean, like, I don't want to put too much emphasis on online behavior, but I think Trump was a troll. He was a Twitter troll, and he became president, and he shit on people all the time. And that encouraged so many people to be like, this is fun. I want to cause as much anguish as possible to complete strangers by getting in their mentions and saying horrible shit. And then when he lost, I don't think it took all of the fun out of it, but I think it took some of the fun out of it for these guys who, really reveled in seeing Trump do crazy shit on social media every day.
Yeah. There's a thing that happens in the beginning of the book that I wanted to ask about. You note that you write the words black and white with lowercase.
Yeah.
Why is that?
So there was like a thing that happened after the George Floyd protests started, where organizations were like, well, we're going to capitalize Black now. And some organizations actually started capitalizing white too. And I didn't like either of those things. I feel like, one of the arguments that I've been trying to make for a long time is that race is a biological fiction. It's not real. It's something that was invented in the last few centuries. There's a wonderful book by a historian named Nell Irvin Painter called The History of White People. And it's actually just the history of the concept of race and how it developed sort of in complete, like, weird, accidental historical ways, but that has absolutely nothing to do with actual science. And so when people started capitalizing the Being Black, The Atlantic does it, my employer, a lot of news outlets do it now, or capitalizing the W in white, I felt like it was reinforcing this idea that biological races are a real thing, and they're not a real thing. And the belief that they are a real thing is the cause of so many of our problems, both in the United States and across the world. That I just think it's a mistake to reinforce that idea.
I don't know how to ask this question. If I'm writing about if I'm writing about basketball and I'm trying to like get a point across of whatever the thing, let's say I'm writing about like why LeBron James has become better than Michael Jordan.
Mhm.
Just to make an example, like
Non-controversial subject.
there's a certain point where I have to be like, well, there's no way I'm going to be able to convince everybody of this, and like that's fine because it's just basketball. You're writing about much bigger stuff. Is there a time in your head where you're like, I'm never going to be able to convince everybody of this, and it's fine?
So
You know what I'm saying?
you are, so first of all, your arguments in your books are incredible because I start to think about things, movies, and in ways that I had actually not thought of them at all before. So you're selling yourself a bit short here as far as basketball and movies and making those arguments. But what actually don't see my job as persuading people. I think that's a mistake. I think the job is to describe what's happening as accurately as possible. And obviously, I want to read arguments from the other side and make sure that I am making the strongest possible case for myself that I can. But I don't assume that I'm going to convince anybody. What I was trying to do with this book was lay down a record, because I think one of the things that happened during the Trump administration is he would do something crazy or evil or nasty, and people would be like, well, he didn't mean it that way, or it wasn't as big of a deal as you thought it was. And like the sort of spin machine would go into overdrive, trying to dismiss or rationalize what had just happened. And so for me, the book is an attempt to guard against that kind of warping effect of memory where we try to say, well, was it really as bad as we thought it was? Yes, it really was as bad as we thought it was. And we knew it at the time, even though people were trying to tell us it wasn't that bad. It's one of the more interesting things to me is that I don't actually think that Donald Trump disagrees with me, that the cruelty is the point, or that he enjoys hurting people. I think that we're actually in agreement about that. The difference is that he thinks it's a good quality that he has.
Yeah.
But I think that for a lot of people who support him or want to defend him, they don't want to think of him that way because of how it might reflect on them. So they start to rationalize and defend it. But I don't think he has any illusions about what he is, what kind of forces he was conjuring up, or why people cheered when he was like calling Kaepernick a son of a bitch and telling him to get off the field. I don't think there's any real mystery to him about why, a certain part of his base absolutely loved that.
Right. You have a piece in here called "Abolish Police Unions," and it's about like the role that the police unions play in the conversation and about police impunity. I'm just curious, how does that? You've been in San Antonio long enough now? Are you thinking about that like with regard to San Antonio as well, or like, you know what I'm saying?
I was looking at the San Antonio Police Union is one of the stronger police unions in the country, actually. And there's there's a local police union organizer who is very influential in terms of like he literally wrote a book about organizing in San Antonio, and it influenced other unions across the country. And I've actually talked to him quite a bit, and he's a guy who he obviously thinks he's doing the right thing. He's helping out cops who are just trying to do their job. But my issue with police unions is that police can kill people. And so when you have, unlike every other kind of union, unions are always going to advocate for their workers, and that's good because that's what they're there for. And sometimes what the workers want and what the public wants is going to conflict. And the unions there are to advocate for their workers, not the public. And that's fine as far as it goes in a regular situation. But it's different when you're talking about a job where someone has the authority to kill, because then protecting that authority or making sure that they can't be punished for exercising that authority becomes an interest of the union itself. And so you have armed agents of the state who are trying to protect their ability to use force against the public that they're supposed to protect under any circumstances. And to me, that short circuits the accountability within a police department, because guys who witness cops doing bad things, who may want to say something, he sees a cop, mistreat somebody or steal something or plant drugs or something like that. If he speaks up, chances are the guy he speaks up against is not going to get fired. Everybody's going to be mad at him for speaking up. They're going to think he's a snitch. And he's not going to get people coming when he calls for backup. He's not going to get guys showing up. And so there's this negative feedback loop where guys who do bad things as police officers don't get punished for it. They stay in the job. And the people who want to actually do the job properly, they have to be quiet or they have to leave the profession. And that system, that sort of like cycle of, they say, it's just a couple of bad apples, but that's a system that protects bad apples. And so I think, inevitably, it's a situation in which police unions are going to advocate not simply for their own workers, but against this ability to use force with impunity against the public they're meant to protect. And part of that is going to be like thinking of themselves as being at war with the public. And I want to be clear, like some of the problems that I'm talking about, they actually long predate police unions. It's just that the power of the unions has bureaucratized these problems with policing that, might have otherwise been solved. So, and I talked to a lot of cops for that piece. And, I'm sympathetic to the idea that, they want to have decent pay and benefits and they don't want to get fired. They don't want to get blamed for something that's the boss's fault and then arbitrarily fired. But ultimately, I just think that, part of why the police have so little legitimacy in certain parts of the country is because they can't solve crime because people don't trust them because they might, they might lose their freedom or their life in a chance encounter with law enforcement. And then if something like that happens, that officer who misuses their powers is going to stay on the force anyway. And that severely hampers their ability to deal with, to deal with the actual problem that they're supposed to deal with, which is, violent crime. So it's just, it just, to me, it just creates this vicious cycle of, these neighborhoods that are suffering from crime have to deal with police who are also mistreating them. The crimes therefore don't get solved, and pretty much everybody loses, except for the people who are getting decent pay and benefits as a result of the union that protects their ability to use force with impunity. And I just don't think that's right.
We have some questions we're going to get to in a second, but I have a few more things for you. The first, this is a structural question. This is something I always enjoy asking other authors. Whenever I'm working on a book of my own, I have in the back of my head like a main theme for the book. This is how I'm going to decide what I want to put in the book, is it has to at some point like tie back to this thing. Did you have something like that in your head when you're working on Cruelty as a point? Like, how do you know which of your pieces to include, which ones to leave off, and when to like write a new thing?
So I think basically the stuff that I decided to add that was new was ideas that I had that, were ideas that I had that I just never got to finish during the Trump administration. So I wanted to keep working on them later. But the theme to me was about how this, when you have a multiracial democracy, how this, ideology of trying to exclude certain people because of their race or religion from participation in the political process, and how that process happens, how a kind of politics and ideology develops where you want to, where you try to exclude those people, and how you justify it to your voters, given that we live in a country that prides itself on the idea that it's founded on that all people are created equal. And so to me, everything in the book is about that contradiction, that sort of dual idea about, America as a country for everyone, anybody can be an American, and, America as, a white Christian country that, fundamentally belongs to people of that background.
I think that's where I was headed when I started like reading it, and then I got halfway and I was like, I don't know if I did this right. So that's good.
No, you're good.
That's good. That's good to hear. Okay, good. Let me ask some of the questions that are in the chat here. Yeah, we'll do that. The first one is, this is how I know is one of my people who showed up, because the first question is from Robert Davila, and it just says, was he in the movie Blood In, Blood Out? And I think that's fucking hilarious. Have you ever seen Blood In, Blood Out?
I have not seen. I know what it is, but I haven't seen it.
Oh man, it's my favorite movie of all time. I've seen it more than any other movie. It's fucking awesome. You got to watch it. It's
We're gonna
the
have
best.
to see that.
You can't listen. I tried to do this thing. Who was it? Alamo Drafthouse reached out to me one time. This was when I was living in Houston, and they asked me if I wanted to do a movie event there, and I can pick whatever movie I want. and we're going to show it, and then like it was going to be like a fun thing. I said, yeah, definitely, but only if we can show the movie Blood In, Blood Out. And they were like, cool, let's do it. And then like a week later, they hit me back, and it turns out they can't do it because Disney owns the rights to this Chicano gangster movie for some reason.
That is the most dystopian shit I've ever heard in my life.
They own the rights to it, and they won't. It's not on any stream. It's not you. There's nowhere for you to. You have to. The only way you can watch it is if you go to fucking an HEB in San Antonio, and at the register they're always.
And you pick up one of those DVDs, yeah.
You have to get an actual DVD.
The streaming thing is kind of dystopian when you think about like one day if you don't have physical media of something, you just might not ever be able to see it again.
You just don't have it. This is why I have like 4 copies of the movie on DVD. Somebody keeps uploading it to YouTube like in its entirety, but it's a super like grainy, it's like it's been through 4 or 5. Yeah. You can barely see it. You can if you try to watch it on your TV, you're fucking toast. There's no chance. All right. This one you sort of answered already, but let's just ask it. Do you think cruelty has always been a factor and the US has always felt this way, but Trump for some reason allowed people to show their true feelings? Add in the internet and phone cameras, so things that were under the surface are now broadly visible.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the phone camera, especially when you start talking about police brutality, I think is like a tremendous thing because America is still pretty segregated. And, you know, when you go back to even if you go back to the 1960s, some of the most iconic images of the civil rights movement are images of police brutality. The Edmund Pettus Bridge or MLK, you know, being manhandled at a police station after being arrested at a sit-in. You know, these images awakened a part of white America's conscience for a reason because of segregation, they were not aware that these things happened. And I think beginning in the Obama administration, beginning with like Ferguson and onward, the cell phone camera revealed a level of violence in, you know, in encounters that Black and Latino people have in, you know, just with law enforcement on like an all too casual basis. And that radicalized a lot of people because they're like, oh, now I understand why some people have like really harsh feelings towards the police because every interaction I've ever had with the police has been positive. So I don't understand why anybody would have any hostility towards them. I think the cell phone camera is a tremendous. The flip side of that, though, is that the people who looked at, you know, cell phone videos of people being beat up or people being shot in the back and decided that they were on the cop's side, those people are like radicalized in the other direction. And I think you've seen a little bit of that too. As far as like, you know, yeah, I mean, look, the point of the book is that this type of politics has been with us. It flares up at different times in our history. And Trump really, all he did was like watch Fox News and take everything that was happening on Fox News and reflect it back to that audience and validate all their fears about society and where it was going. I mean, that's what the whole birther thing was. He didn't come up with birtherism. He just became an enthusiastic proponent of it because he understood that that's what the base wanted to hear. They wanted to hear that the president was illegitimate. He was born in Kenya. He was a secret Muslim, all this crazy shit, because what they wanted to hear was that he didn't really count as an American president because of how him being president made them feel. But I don't think it's unique to Trump. He was just particularly good at inflaming those sorts of things.
I remember when when like the cell phone camera stuff started really going and everybody was talking about it. And it was like, I mean, not everybody, but like all of the white people started talking about it. And it was like, we fucking been telling y'all this for like decades. And then, but you know, here we are.
But then the video is like, they can't ignore the video. Just like in the 60s, they couldn't look away from the photographs. The video validated certain criticisms of law enforcement, at least law enforcement having a problem with systemic racism, which to some extent they also acknowledge now. But it validated this as a problem. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to agree on like the actual solution to that problem. Obviously, like, you know, there's a wide spectrum of arguments about, you know, what you should do about systemic racism in law enforcement. But I do think that there was a period, at least, you know, over 2020, where people across the political spectrum really recognized, like, yeah, there's something messed up going on here, and something should probably be done about it.
Yeah. Next question is from Eric Ramirez. What's your view on local politics in San Antonio and its recent progressive wins in city council?
I can't comment on that because I don't feel like I understand the significance of those recent wins well enough to comment. Unfortunately, I have been buried in bookland for the past few months and have not been able to really pay as much attention to local essay politics as much as I wanted to beyond the police union referendum, which I was doing a lot of reporting on, but that piece isn't out yet. So I can't really say anything there. I will say that, San Antonio is interesting because people always talk about, I feel like people outside of Texas, and this shit is really annoying. People outside of Texas always talk about Texas as if Texas is Greg Abbott and like nothing else.
Yeah.
And like I remember when the storm was happening and like people were free, like I would have people in my mentions saying things like, "Oh, well, y'all shouldn't have voted for Greg Abbott then." And it's like, motherfucker, there are so many millions of people here. Like, how could you say that? And it's like it's almost like a reverse Trumpian thing, except that it's like, just randos on the internet. It's not like an actual politician. Like when California was having its blackouts, Ted Cruz was like, ha ha, ha ha. Yeah, that's what you get for being socialist, even though they have a system that's actually deregulated, just like Texas is. But yeah, I mean, like, I just think, what's interesting about San Antonio is that it has such an interesting, it has such a distinct Texas culture that is very different from Austin or Houston or Dallas, and it doesn't quite get as much attention out of state. But personally, I really like living there, and I've very, very much enjoyed myself. And I think people who live outside of Texas and have never come here would be surprised at how much how not necessarily how familiar San Antonio is, but how much it would be the kind of place that they would like to live.
Right. There are multiple Fast and the Furious questions in here, which is hilarious. I have to assume.
Please go for those. Go for it.
This is the first time at one of your book things, and the only time that this will happen. Here's one from Andrew Malone. Does the gradual silification of the Fast and the Furious series and its exploding success indicate that America generally does not want to reckon with the consequences of its actions? Are you going to answer this, Ad? I don't like this.
I think this is for you. This one's for you.
This to me is like not a question that you ask about this, friend. Like you watch this, you watch these movies not to learn something about America. You watch it because you want to fucking see a car with magnets blast some other cars through a building, and then watch Tyrese and Ludacris go into outer space. Like that's why you watch the movie. You know what I'm saying?
You want to see The Rock and Vin Diesel punch each other out.
I want to see Vin Diesel pick up The Rock, slam him on the floor, and then fucking a mega wrench. If he wanted to, he could have killed him, but he didn't. That's what I want to see. That's what I'm.
There's actually a question in here that I actually want to answer. There's a question from Manu Platt. What's your take on Black Trump voters or other groups who do not see the cruelty or can overlook it for their other one reason to vote? Look, there are absolutely, Trump did better in 2020 with Latino and Black voters than he did in 2016. Only a little bit better with Black voters, and noticeably better with Latino voters, although not as well as George W. Bush. I think, what I write about is what Trump stands for and what he believes in. And there are, when you go back to like, say, 1932, and FDR is winning the Black vote in the North, the Democratic Party is still a racist organization. Like, it's still the party of Jim Crow. It's still a one-party organization in the South that doesn't believe Black people should be allowed to vote. So optimistically, maybe the fact that the Republican Party is getting more diverse is going to compel them not to engage in the kind of attacks on democracy that we've been seeing them engage in. But I don't think it actually, if people, hold their nose or they overlook Trump's racism to vote for him, because of economic reasons or something like that, I don't think that actually changes the nature of what Trump is or what he stands for or what he believes.
Right. Okay, let me ask you this one. This is from Jeffrey Lindsay. I'm interested in this one as well. Regarding Texas politics, do you think a charismatic celebrity and Austin mascot, Matthew McConaughey, has the best chance to shake up the governor's race and drive turnout for lower propensity voters, benefiting the Democratic Party down the ballot? Can Matthew McConaughey save us?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know. The thing about it is that public opinion tends to uh, turn against the president's party during midterms.
Yeah.
With Trump, that led to the Republicans losing the House. With Obama, it led to Democrats losing the House. It's something that political scientists call thermostatic public opinion. So in a state like Texas that is pretty conservative, it's less conservative than it used to be, but it's pretty conservative. A midterm or running for governor when a Democrat is president, that's going to be an uphill battle. I think probably even for Matthew McConaughey, who obviously is very beloved in the state. I think it's just a difficult. I think it's just an uphill battle, given the circumstances in the state and who's in the White House.
Next question, Kyle Cook. I'm just jumping around here, grabbing the ones that I think are that I want to hear the answers to. Joan Costin believes that Trumpism doesn't actually exist, that he is a blank canvas for people to project their preferred policies on him. Do you think there are errors to Trumpism, and does it exist?
I think it does exist. I mean, I think that Trump didn't really invent Trumpism. I mean, the example that I give sometimes is, during the Trump administration, they wanted to add this question to the citizenship question to the census because their plan was to implement a scheme. It was basically a nationwide racial gerrymander. They wanted to enhance the influence of white voters at the expense of non-white voters. And they almost succeeded, except that at the last minute, the daughter of the Republican operative who came up with the scheme gave his hard drives after the guy died, and his daughter, who was a liberal, gave his hard drives to liberal organizations, and they discovered that this was the explicit plan to enhance the power of white voters and diminish the influence of non-white voters. And this basically, if you look at the Supreme Court case, like basically Roberts flipped at the last minute because of that news story. When you read his opinion, it looks like he's going to side with the administration, but then he says he sides with the Democratic appointees at the last minute, basically on a technicality. And it was because they had like documented proof that this was a racist scheme. And that guy who came up with that, he came up with it before Trump even got elected. You know what I'm saying? Like Trump did not come up with that scheme by himself. His administration chose to pursue its implementation, but he didn't come up with it. He didn't come up with it because the Republican Party, unfortunately, had already started heading in this direction. I mean, I think you can sort of trace it. McCain was obviously a moderate on immigration, but you can kind of trace it to 2006 when George W. Bush tried to do a comprehensive immigration plan, and that got killed by right-wing talk radio. It was like it was one of the major rebellions against Bush during his presidency. And I think from that point on, there was just, the party just drifted more and more into the kind of white identity politics that necessitates treating other constituencies in the country as somehow dangerous to you and your way of life.
Here's a question. I love this question right here. This is from Jacqueline Landry. Adam, one of the reasons your work has been so meaningful is that you're able to take a step back from the deluge of daily outrages and put them in a broader historical context. I'm curious how you manage the balance between keeping up with the current news cycle and reading historical perspectives. This is a great pull by Jacqueline, because this is definitely my favorite thing about any of the stuff that you write. There's always an entry point into it, and then you get it, and then like as a reader, we get into it, and it's just like, oh fuck, like there's so like I feel like I'm in, like I put on the VR headset, and I can see you're doing all of this other stuff in there. So to repeat the question, how do you manage the balance between keeping up with the current news cycle and reading historical perspectives?
So thank you that was very kind of you to say, and thank you very much, Jacqueline. The answer is that I often don't. I mean, you guys don't see a lot of the pieces that you guys don't see the pieces that I don't publish. I frequently get overwhelmed with my attempts to like put stories together in a historical context with with current events. It's really hard. I mean, like I'm reading all the time, and eventually like the knowledge that I'm taking in as I'm reading these books, sometimes percolates into a piece. But sometimes I try to write something and I just completely mess it up, or it doesn't work, or the moment passes and it just like doesn't work. So that happens to me all the time, but nobody sees the pieces that you don't publish, so it's not really apparent. But the answer is it's hard. At least it's hard for me. Since it may not be hard for other people. And most of like when y'all see those pieces that actually do come out, it's stuff that I've typically been working on for a long time. Even if it's something that I did, it was a quick turnaround. It's a result of something that I was thinking about for a long time, so that I was able to put it down on paper in an expedient way.
Here's one from Austin, the person, and possibly the city. I like your ideas around not capitalizing Black, but I wonder if, as a white person, if I were to use that rationalization to not capitalize the B, don't I sound like one of those folks that like to say, I don't see color? For the record, while I like your ideas, I'm going to keep using the capital B.
I think it's up to everyone. Like, I don't criticize my colleagues, white and Black, who use the capital B. I have to use it because it's our house style at the Atlantic. I think that it's I wanted to explain my decision at the beginning because I wanted people to understand why I felt that way. But to the extent that people are using the capital B, I hope they are still understanding that this race thing is just made up. I mean, it's a fairy tale. It's not real. And racism is real. But my friend Ta-Nehisi Coates says, he says, race is the child of racism, not the father.
That's wild. That's wild to think about. Here's one from Micah. Do you mind elaborating on what type of structural changes would have to happen so racist parties and policies won't be incentivized? Doesn't the racial makeup of America and its geographic distribution make it less of a structural electioneering question and more that there's just a lot of lowercase white people?
No, I don't necessarily think that's the case, because I think there's a couple things. I think ideally what you have is you have two integrated parties. You don't have one really multiracial diverse party and you have one party that's mostly white. I think when you have both parties competing for the votes of people of many different backgrounds, then you're less likely to get into a situation where one party feels like they have to rig the rules to survive. In some sense, I think part of that is admitting new states. It is guaranteeing that the franchises cannot be interfered with by ambitious politicians. In some ways, I think it's also shoring up traditional American institutions like unions. I think the decline of unions is a huge part of the problems that we're having in the United States, because unions forge the kind of like cross-racial solidarity that helps a multiracial society function, and they also act as a counterbalance to the power of the wealthy. I mean, since the 1970s, we basically have been living, we've had this incredible widening inequality between the top 1, 10, 15% and the rest of the country. And a big part of that is the decline of unions and their ability to influence the political process to ensure that the wealth of the country is more evenly distributed. And I think in the lack of that distribution, I think it actually contributes to some extent to our culture war politics, because people are basically fighting over scraps. In other words, these symbolic issues become tremendously more important because the real issues that we want to deal with can't actually get solved. So I actually don't think that the divides in our society that exist today are necessarily permanent. I think that they've obviously existed as a part of America for a very long time, since the very beginning. But I am not one of those people who thinks like, this is going to be how it's going to be forever necessarily. I think, ultimately the legacy of the Trump administration going forward is what we decide to make of it. And it's not just something that is inevitable.
Here's another question that's in there. Do you anticipate Trump winning in 2024?
I don't like to make predictions about elections because I just feel like that's the polls have been so off so many times, and I think it's very difficult. I think taking the temperature of the country is far more difficult than it used to be. It used to be, you'd go out and you talk to people in different parts of the country, you'd look at the polls, you'd have a pretty good idea of what's going on. And when you look at how off the polls were, for much of the Trump administration, because he turned out a lot of low propensity voters, I think it's very difficult. And some voters who, basically stopped responding to polling questions because they were angry with the polls because they felt they were biased. It's very difficult to gauge the temperature of the country. I think that if the Biden administration does not succeed in, reviving the American economy and distributing its gains better than the Trump administration did, I think they are going to face a serious Republican challenger who has a good chance at winning, whether or not it's Trump or someone who wants to be like Trump. And ultimately, the way that the party is right now, it's going to be hard to imagine that the next nominee is not going to be Trump or someone who is an heir to Trump in some ideological way.
Sort of off of that question, Joshua Medina is asking, is the Democratic Party doing enough right now to discourage the next variant of a Trump-esque politician? Do you believe the party is afraid to punish Trump for his crimes out of fear of galvanizing the Republican base?
So I do not think they're doing enough in terms of the fact that they're not passing voting rights legislation. They're not admitting new states. They're not passing legislation that makes it easier to form unions. I think that, sorry, what was the second part of that question? Punish Trump. So look, political parties don't punish people for crimes. I mean, Trump tried very hard to get the Justice Department to punish some of his enemies for crimes. We're finding out all this stuff about how they were spying on journalists. I don't want the Democratic Party or the Biden Justice Department to literally punish people for crimes in a criminal justice sense. Do I think that the Democratic Party should be more investigating of suspicious things that happened during the Trump era? Yes, I do, because I want, not just because I want to see Republicans pay a political price or something, but because I don't think we know everything that happened during the Trump administration. All this stuff that's coming out, and one of the ways that you find out what happened is you have congressional committees make document requests and call witnesses and look into what happened. I mean, after the Nixon administration, you had things like the church committee. When you have an episode like this, where democracy is threatened by someone at the highest levels of American government, you want to examine what went wrong. And look, maybe that would be politically beneficial to Democrats, but I want that to happen simply because as an American citizen and as a journalist, I want to know exactly what was going on in that White House, and I don't think we actually really know.
Let's end on a question looking forward. Shane Chang is asking, assuming everything's still around 25 years from now, which is a big assumption, it feels like at this particular moment, what are your best, worst, probable scenarios for what you think political parties will look like? I like that question. That's a good question.
I mean, I don't know the answer. What I hope is that American democracy is still intact, that everybody, still has their right to the franchise and can exercise it in such a way so as to make sure that people are able to choose their leaders. And when leaders, misuse their power, they can be removed from office by the voters. Things can move pretty fast. I mean, when you think about how racist the president, Democrat Woodrow Wilson was, and how the New Deal coalition changed the Democratic Party 20 years later, things move. I wouldn't say they move fast. They happen so slowly that when we see them, it seems like it just happened like that. And so it's like a glacier or something. But I wouldn't want to make any predictions. I will just say that the Democratic Party as it exists today and the Republican Party as it exists today may not be the entity that they are today in 20 years. I mean, if you just think back to 2012, or after Barack Obama won election and he's making fun of Trump at the White House Correspondents' Center, nobody thought at Obama's inauguration in 2012 that the next president of the United States was Donald Trump. So things can move really fast and you never know.
Let's bring Elizabeth back. Miss Elizabeth, come on in. There you are.
Thank you, guys. That was awesome. I never knew we were going to go from blood in, blood out and Fast and the Furious all the way through, defunding.
Now I feel like we got to figure out a way to force Disney to let us show blood in, blood out. And
dude, I've been trying. I have been sending emails every day.
We'll just do a sneak one at the bar at nowhere. Once we get the bookstore opened, it'll be fine.
I have a guerrilla showing of blood in, blood out.
Yeah, exactly. Shh, don't tell anyone. I want to thank both of our panelists tonight, Shea Serrano and Adam Serwer. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us. Congratulations on the publication of your book, Adam.
Thank you so much.
We're very, again.
Thanks to all of you for coming. Thank you,
thanks
Shea.
everybody for attending. The books will ship out early next week once we get them signed. And also we have recorded this and it'll be posted on our YouTube channel soon as well. So if you want to relive any of these moments, it'll be there for you forever. So thank you so much and good night.
Good night.
Peace.